Good evening. My name is Lauren Hodge, and I am doing my lecture on my presentation on Huang Fu Mi. The Zhenjiao Jia Jing, known as the Canon of Acupuncture and Moxibustion, is considered to be one of the most important texts and influential texts of its time after the Huang Jing. Huang Fu Mi is depicted as a knowledgeable man with somewhat of a revolutionary. In the eyes of some authors, however, he is regarded as nothing more than an editor who restored, summarised, and just rearranged older material. His structured interpretation of the literature available at the time significantly enhanced the precision and efficacy of acupuncture and moxibustion, exploring needle technique, point prescription, location and indications, forbidden points, and then specifies gynecological, pediatric, and internal-external diseases. Born into a world of poverty during the Jing dynasty, Huang Fu studied under a famous scholar, Shi Tang, and emerged as a theorist and scholar in his own right. The Jing dynasty actually was a time of considerable progression and growth in both science and medicine. He shunned offers to serve in the court and the government, instead dedicating his days to reviewing and reconsidering classical texts. By the age of 26, he had written two biographies, Imperial Records and the Chronicles of the Annual Chronicles of the Minutes, and he became quite a well-known historian. Huang Fu Mi gradually turned to the study of medicine after becoming gravely ill. He contracted wind-damp B syndrome and resulted in loss of sensation and hemiplegia of his right leg. When I first heard about it, I thought that he had been prescribed the wrong medicine. But in doing further research, I realised that he had attempted to treat himself. He'd given himself the wrong ineffectual treatment, and he had actually suffered drug poisoning from the cold food powder, Hung Shi San. And so therefore, from then, he just felt compelled to dedicate himself to absorbing Chinese ancient wisdoms. He was actually quite a prolific writer. So on the left hand of the side of the screen, you've actually got all of the books that he's actually written before his highest accomplishment, which was the assembly and the consolidation of all of his knowledge and all of the previous knowledge into the one text, which is the Zhenjiao Jia Jing. He is the first acupuncturist to collate records and is regarded as one of the founders of acupuncture and moxibustion. He actually, for this text, he analysed the three classic texts of the time: Huang Jing, Su Wen, the Ling Shu, and the Essentials of Acupoint Location and Treatment. And he began to edit and reorganise the contents in a way that was just easier to understand. He took out some stuff that was just confusing, and he's made it really, really easy to read and to refer to. The Zhenjiao consists of 12 volumes. They're very extensive, and they include 128 chapters. And it's actually divided into two parts. So part one discusses the traditional Chinese medicine theory and the fundamental knowledge of acupuncture and moxibustion. And the second part studies the clinical treatments and the management approaches. So it goes through the etiology, the pathogenesis, differentiation, the point indications and prescription, and prevention. So there's two unique accomplishments of the Zhenjiao. First is the theory of acupuncture. So it has open discussions around the function and the pathological changes related to the 8 extra channels alongside the 12 primary channels. It also has bone measurements, so tun measurements, and point prescriptions where specific disease and disorder arises. Secondly, he regulated the point location and numbers. The Zhenjiao enhanced the precision and efficacy of acupuncture and moxibustion by exploring needle technique, point prescription, forbidden points, the gynae and pediatrics, and location and indication. He increased the number of identified acupuncture points from, I think there was like 160 points in the Huang Jing, and he expanded that to 348, where he noted indications for every point. So there was 49 unilateral and 299 bilateral points. So it's actually acknowledged in Chinese medicine community, as a very detailed and comprehensive textbook. Huang Fu Mi advocated the concept of Maidong Fa, or pathogenesis of meridian disorder, meaning that the diagnosis was organised according to the complete examination of all the signs and symptoms. So it collects information via inquiry, inspection, auscultation, olfaction, and palpation. It does pulse diagnosis, and all of these combined actually identify the affected meridian, and then from there decides the specific treatment protocol and the acupoints. These points were named the ruling points, and they were chosen based on specific signs and symptoms, and then address the distinctive pattern in an effort to resolve that specific dysfunction. So understanding the whole concept of the diagnosis through the four methods is actually still really beneficial, if not essential, in today's practice, to assess modern disease. So a lot of the modern diseases like chronic fatigue, thyroid dysfunction, and fibromyalgia weren't actually in any of the Chinese texts. So understanding the whole concept behind the inquiry can actually treat diseases that weren't in the texts. So Huang Fu Mi actually examines over 100 internal and external disorders, including gynae, pediatric, and ENT, ear, nose, and throat disorders. So he features the pattern, the pathogenesis, the selection, and he includes the contraindications for over 500 disorders, which is pretty impressive. He emphasises the importance of being a good doctor and knowing how to prevent and cure rather than just treating the manifesting symptoms. And he elaborated on all the work of the ancient physicians, as well as his own personal experiences and treatments. The text is still presently highly regarded as a reference guide for practitioners and students alike, and then it was even referenced in Japan and Korea eventually. So during the Tang Dynasty, Sun Simiao drew on Huang Fu Mi's work regarding channel and acupoint accuracy, and then the manipulations, which, so for instance, reinforcing and reducing techniques. So he built on that, the point accuracy with that. And then similar in the Song Dynasty, Wang Wei Yi designed a bronze statue of acupoints with the acupoints of Huang Fu Mi's location accuracy, and he also wrote a book and where he used the foundations of Huang Fu Mi's work. In recent years, the Zhengzhou was actually one of the original classic texts to reference the 16 Shi clef points. However, in his text, he didn't actually elaborate on how and why they were applied. But it was later identified that his Shi clef points addressed acute stagnation and pain disorders, and was beneficial as a palpation technique to identify the organs involved. So modern studies use scientific approaches like MRI to verify and corroborate and expand the theories of the traditional texts regarding the mechanism and how, and the MRI actually notes how it actually changes the dynamic in both the brain and the body by taking before-after MRIs to see the actual changes. A study in 2013 investigated Huang Fu Mi's ruling point indications on the gastrointestinal functions using REN12. So the Zhengzhou REN12 is indicated for abdo pain and distension, borborygmi, bowel movement issues, and undigested food in the stools. And so therefore it was quite a good point to explore the changes in the body with using that point. Also, similarly, Huang et al. 2012 chose 36, stomach 36, and investigated its actions in the treatment of dyspepsia. So they measured the pulse pressure before, during, and after acupuncture, and both of those studies actually had a decrease in symptoms post-treatment. So it's actually, it's modern times. It's actually becoming there's more recognition and acceptance of acupuncture as a prevention and a treatment method in today's society. So Huang Fu Mi demonstrated very early on that he wanted to share all his knowledge with future generations. He dedicated his life to understanding the history of medicine and disease prevention. The Zhenjiao Jiayi was his interpretation of the classic texts of the time, and then his methodical and practical delivery. It just paved the way of bridging the past and the present, and emphasising the importance of constant learning and expansion. And then the last page is my references. Thank you.